Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's the United States saying it will not defend the Syrian Democratic Forces from Turkish attacks in northern Syria. Pentagon officials say US forces have evacuated 2 observation posts in Syria along the Turkish border. In a statement, the White House said Turkey will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area in the last 2 years. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and ensure Turkey's security. The SDF said the withdrawal is a breach of commitments by the United States that will have a negative impact on the war against ISIS. The developments came hours after a phone call between President Erdogan and his US counterpart Donald Trump. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our Moscow correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you for joining us here on Indus News. So tell me, Ross, President Erdogan regularly interacts with Russian President Vladimir Putin and is a key military and diplomatic ally of the Syrian government. How do you think Moscow now is going to view this Turkish operation inside northeastern Syria?
This actually might play positively for Moscow if this goes ahead, this Turkish incursion into northeastern Syria. One thing that Moscow has said is that Kurdish rights must be respected, but that respect must come under a single state. So Russia wants to see the return to Syrian control by Damascus, President Bashar al-Assad, of all of Syria. The territorial integrity of Syria as it was in 2011, before the start of the civil war, must be returned to government control, and that would include the Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Syria, respecting the rights of Kurdish people in that area, but that they must accept that the Syrian government will eventually have control of those Kurdish-run areas. Moscow has been readying itself for a possible mediation role when it comes to this. Now, the Kurds may see themselves abandoned, perhaps, by the US on one hand, if they are going to, the US is going to step aside, not stand in the way of any possible Turkish incursion. The Kurds then may look to Moscow for more support, saying, well, can you help us? Could you guarantee our security? Moscow, of course, would say, well, if we can, it's going to be coming through the control of the Syrian government. So obviously, as you said, Russia is a major backer of the Assad regime, and Turkey supports the anti-Assad regime, but they have been working together also, as you mentioned, on other projects.
Ross, what impact will the Turkish military action have on the political negotiations of Syria's future?
Well, one issue that the Russian and Turkish presidents seem to have overcome is the fact that, as I mentioned, they support different sides in the conflict. And over the several years where we've had Russia supporting the Assad regime and Turkey supporting those anti-government rebels, that hasn't totally impacted on their cooperation, along with Iran, in the Astana framework. We've seen regular commitments and regular meetings in Turkey, Russia, to try to guarantee this framework will work as they try to build towards possible peace negotiations for the end of the deal, for the end of the war. Some kind of peace deal may come out of this. So that doesn't seem to have impacted on the Putin-Erdogan working relationship. This problems on the ground in Syria, if you like, hasn't impacted their relationship so far. So it doesn't seem to be under particular threat at the moment, that Putin-Erdogan friendship.
Okay, Ross, thank you for that. Now, we've heard the Russian side. Let's go to Turkey now and take Mr. Yusuf Erim, who's a political analyst based in Turkey. So, Mr. Erim, welcome on Indus News. Now, you tell me, sir, how will the Turkish military action affect the Astana peace process and the political negotiations on Syria's future?
Well, when we look at the Astana process and what they're working towards, which is a political solution, and the main objective of that political solution is a free and democratic Syria, but also it's Syria that protects its territorial integrity, this Turkish military operation is very important in supporting that objective. Because when we look at who the greatest threat to Syria's territorial integrity is, it's the SDF. Most namely the YPG, which makes a huge majority of the SDF. Now, the YPG, also known as the People's Protection Unit, is a group that is an affiliate of the PKK terrorist organization. And right now, looking at the rhetoric coming out of their camp, their main objective is autonomy in Syria. They want to use the northeast part of Syria that they've been able to seize because of the instability of the conflict as a headquarters that they plan on turning into their own little statelet in the future. So this Turkish military operation is going to be very complementary to the work that Astana is doing, very complementary to the work the Constitutional Committee is doing, and in line with protecting the territorial integrity of Syria.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you heard Ross saying that Russia is on the side of Syria with President Assad and Turkey is on the other side. So what do you think where the US fits into this? Will Turkey now request support from the US in this operation, or will they act on their own objectives?
Turkey has not asked for support from the United States in this military operation. It's more than ready to go unilaterally. What the Turks saw as an obstacle was the presence of their NATO ally, American troops in the region, and that was the most important aspect behind Turkey's delays. They didn't want to risk any type of confrontation between Turkish and U.S. troops that would have completely escalated the situation and hurt the relationship. So while the U.S. has said we're not supporting this operation, but at the same time, they said we won't stand in the way of this operation. So while it looks like a unilateral Turkish operation, there is a bilateral agreement between Turkey and the United States that the United States will move aside and hand over its responsibility of fighting and preventing a Daesh revival to Turkey, which Turkey will gladly accept this because this safe zone is not only against the YPG, it's against all terror elements in the region. And Daesh has always been an enemy of Turkey all the way back from 2016 when Turkey launched Operation Euphrates Shield, neutralizing over 3,000 Daesh terrorist fighters.
Yusuf Eren, thank you for your time. Now, from one war to another, and in Afghanistan, a suicide bomber kills 10 people and wounds 27 others in Jalalabad city. Officials said the attack targeted a bus carrying security forces. They said some of the wounded were in critical condition, but yet no group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Well, staying with Afghanistan, and on the 18th anniversary of the US invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban say America has totally failed in its ambitions. In a statement, the group said it has brought the US down to its knees in the country. It said the only way to end the war is a complete withdrawal of US forces. The statement went on to say that the group will fight for US forces for another 18 years unless their demands are met. It went on to say that the recently held elections have failed to improve the situation. Meanwhile, a group of 11 key Taliban prisoners have been released in exchange for 3 Indian hostages. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Mr. James Dorsey, who's a political analyst based in Singapore. James, welcome and thank you for your time here on Indus News. So what do you make of the Afghan Taliban's claim that America has totally failed in its ambitions in Afghanistan and it will bring the US to its knees in the country?
The proof will be in the pudding, but essentially that is true. With other words, 18 years after the beginning of the war, the United States is currently negotiating its withdrawal from Afghanistan with the Taliban, the very group that it was overthrowing in 2001. And it's leaving behind a country in which, with enormous political and economic problems, in which it's very, at least probable or possible, that the Taliban will come back into government, and again, possibly as Afghanistan's sole rulers.
On the one hand, you got the Taliban jeopardizing security. On the other, they're saying they brought the US to its knees and its country. What are the chances of these kind of statements jeopardizing the resumption of talks of peace between the US and the Taliban, James?
I don't think that they're going to have much effect. I mean, I think they will be taken as par for the course and as expected. I think more fundamentally, there are lessons to be learned from all of this. First of all, and that's not exclusively American, we see that in other wars by other countries too, traditional militaries have the greatest difficulty in fighting non-state actors who employ asymmetric warfare. The other lesson I think one learns is that victory is not simply determined by whether or not one has succeeded militarily. Victory is secured if indeed you rebuild and reconstruct the country that has been basically devastated by war. And that's something that the Americans failed to do for both practical problems as well as the United States' continuous grappling with the notion of state building and nation building.
James Dorsey, thank you for taking your time out and joining us here on Indus News. Well, Iran's also stepped into this issue, and its Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says any peace deal in Afghanistan should not favour foreigners. The Foreign Minister says Iran supports peace talks with the representation of all Afghan parties, but said foreign powers should not exclude one or several groups from the process to serve their own vested interests. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. Now, US Senators Christopher Van Hollen and Maggie Hassan met Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan in Islamabad yesterday and discussed regional issues including Kashmir and Afghanistan. In a separate meeting with Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa, the lawmakers acknowledged Pakistan's efforts for regional peace. General Bajwa appreciated the United States for its interest in resolving the Kashmir dispute. Both sides agreed to strengthen bilateral ties. Now, in an interesting twist of tales, it seems diplomatic sources say India is spreading propaganda of capturing 2 Pakistani fishing boats from the disputed region of Sir Creek. They said Indian border forces are spreading fake news to divert the world's attention from the ongoing curfew in occupied Kashmir. India has a long-drawn history of providing fake news to discredit Pakistan, and the BJP government has previously used false flag operations to avert criticism of their own poor performance in their own country. Well, as the crisis does continue in occupied Kashmir, the curfew and communications blackout has entered its 64th day. But Indian government denies the clampdown in the valley even exists. The Home Ministry issued the statement in response to a right to information request by human rights activist Venkatesh Nayak. In its reply, the ministry said it has no information on the names and locations of thousands of arrested Kashmiris. Well, Nagaland rebel leader Twingalang Muiva says New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir is totally unacceptable. In an interview, Mr. Muiva said revocation of Kashmir's special status is a violation of international laws, and he said the move is nothing short of a betrayal to the people of Kashmir. The National Socialist Council of Mughal leader Muiva is pursuing a separate sovereign state for the Naga people. Now, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has left for Beijing on a visit that will demonstrate the importance of Pakistan's diplomatic partnership with China. Khan's dialogue with China's political leadership comes at a crucial time for South Asia. India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir in August poses a clear and present threat to regional stability. Our Islamabad correspondent Sumaira Khan reports on how Khan's visit will be key to preventing a deadly escalation.
In 1963, China and Pakistan signed an agreement that defined the boundaries of their shared border in the Karakoram mountain range. Pakistan played the central role in ending the international isolation of Chinese Communist government. By opening an air corridor in 1972, Pakistan facilitated the historic visit of US President Richard Nixon to China and their establishment of diplomatic relations. Beijing and Islamabad have locked step ever since, establishing one of the strongest diplomatic partnerships of the modern era.
There is a complete unanimity of views between China and Pakistan on almost every aspect of international security and political aspect of both the countries' relation.
For 56 years now, Pakistan and China have worked closely to bring stability to South Asia and the wider region. Prime Minister Imran Khan's visit to Beijing this week comes at a challenging juncture. His government is working overtime to resuscitate the Afghan peace process after the US suddenly pulled out last month. But Pakistan's focus on resolving the 18-year-old conflict in Afghanistan has been diverted since India abruptly abrogated the special status of occupied Kashmir on August 5th. Khan has repeatedly warned that India is playing with fire by inflaming a dispute that threatens to trigger a war between two nuclear-armed states. Analysts believe China's President Xi Jinping is well placed to play peacemaker, despite Beijing's rivalry with New Delhi.
Since the time China has got involved with Afghanistan and Kashmir, this is going to bring about a positive change in the region, and that is more important because our region is seeing a lot of turmoil, especially after August 5 when India annexed the occupied Kashmir.
Over the next 2 weeks, international community will pay a lot of attention to events in Beijing, Islamabad and New Delhi. If between them, Prime Minister Imran Khan and President Xi can bring about an Indian de-escalation, the world will heave a collective sigh of relief. Otherwise, the prospect of peace in South Asia could go from bad to worse.
In Italy, 13 women are dead after a boat carrying migrants sank off the coast of Lampedusa. The ship was carrying migrants from Tunisia and West Africa. Italian authorities have opened investigation into the incident, and this year so far over 1,000 people have died in the Mediterranean whilst trying to reach Europe. In Iraq, clashes between protesters and security forces kill 15 more protesters in Iraq. This brings the death toll to 110 from mass protests against corruption and unemployment in less than a week. The Interior Ministry says an investigation is underway to determine who was behind the violence. It said protesters burned 51 public buildings and 8 political party headquarters. Meanwhile, Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani has urged an end to violence. Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has pledged to talk with protesters without preconditions. In Portugal, the centre-left Socialist Party has won Sunday's parliamentary elections. Prime Minister Antonio Costa's party took 106 seats in the 230-member parliament. The Socialists will need to put together a coalition because it was unable to win a majority in the left house. Leaders of the left and communists have backed Costa since the last election in 2015. Both say they're open to negotiation if the Socialists vow to improve the lives of the working class. Costa said he will continue to work to build a united Europe.
We will never give up in the defense of a stronger Europe, more cohesive and more solidarity, because within Europe and with Europe, we will build our future.
Tunisia's moderate Ennahda party is leading with 18% of the votes in Sunday's parliamentary elections in the country. Exit polls show the leading party's main rival, the Heart of Tunisia party, is at 16%. Both Ennahda and the Heart of Tunisia have refused to form a coalition government. Ennahda's projected vote share translates into only about 40 seats, with 109 needed to form a majority. The results hint at a deeply fractured future parliament. These are the country's third parliamentary polls after its successful transition to democracy following the 2011 Arab Spring revolutions. Well, opposition parties have won Kosovo's general elections. Unofficial results show the centre-left party and the centre-right Democratic League have won each 25% of the vote. President Hashim Thaçi's Democratic Party of Kosovo came third with 20%. With no one taking a majority, the opposition camps will need to unite against the PDK to form a coalition government. On his victory, the leader and the candidate for Prime Minister, Albin Kurti, said his party will fight corruption till the very end.
With us in power, there will be no thieves in the government. There will be no thieves in the state institutions. In line with the rule of our law, thieves will be fought, investigated, prosecuted, and punished in our society, wherever they are.
Now we go to Europe, where French President Emmanuel Macron has given British Prime Minister Boris Johnson a week to submit a final Brexit plan. In a telephone call, Johnson discussed his Brexit proposal and sought President Macron's support for a deal with the EU. The French president urged Johnson to step up his negotiations with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier. Brussels has rejected new Brexit proposals as impractical. Britain and the EU are due to resume talks today to find a new agreement ahead of a key EU summit on October 17th. But the Irish backstop continues to be a sticking point in negotiations. Well, in Sweden, scientists William Kaelin, Peter Ratcliffe and Greg Semenza have won the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize for Medicine. The trio will share a prize of nearly $1 million. The discovery shows how human cells adapt to oxygen levels. Medicine is the first of the Nobel Prizes awarded each year.
Prize in physiology or medicine jointly to William Kaelin, Sir Peter Ratcliffe and Greg Semenza for their discoveries of how cells sense and adapt to oxygen availability.
Now, in other news, in southern Armenia, villagers are protesting against the construction of an open-cast gold mine, posing an ecological threat to the region. The government has approved the project despite environmental concerns, protests and legal controversies. More in this report.
Since 2006, the offshore company Lydian has invested hundreds of millions to extract gold from the Amulsar Mountains. The range is thought to contain 40 tons of the precious metal. From a small Caucasus mountain nation, hundreds of activists gathered in the capital Yerevan, demanding an end to the venture. Villagers say gold mining will pollute drinking water and damage local tourist hotspots, thus affecting their livelihoods. The mining company dismisses villagers' fears as unsubstantiated, but local ecologists warn of their potential dangers.
Due to heavy metals, the bottom substrate, the chemical composition, the water morphology, and the hydrobiology of the river will change, resulting in unmanageable environmental consequences. The water ecosystem will be disrupted.
Environmental groups campaigning against the enterprise are unconvinced by the latest findings.
We are fighting for Armenia, for nature. We are against the mining companies that have come to enrich themselves at the expense of our country and our health. And we will never let that happen.
The frustrated villagers are raising questions about the safety and survival of the next generation. Should the government give go-ahead?
Well, a rare pair of white lions have been born in the Jinan Wildlife Park in eastern China's Shandong province. It's the first successful breeding of white lions in the park. Born during China's National Day holiday, the cubs have been called National Day babies by the zookeepers. White lions are a rare colour mutation of the African lion. The worldwide population of white lions is currently less than just 300. The park has a total of 3 adult white lions, 1 male and 2 females. Well, we'll be back with more news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Now, in business news, Asia markets have been trading mixed as investors remain cautious ahead of the US-China trade negotiations later on this week. Japan's Nikkei 225 remained flat, while Shanghai's stocks dipped 1%. South Korea's Kospi recovered with fractional gains after sliding earlier. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost over 1%. Australia's DAX rose over 0.5%, while London's FTSE traded over 0.5% higher. Well, it's 26 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. And before that, we're hoping Pakistan will win the cricket. Bye-bye.